before. We'll ask everybody to mute themselves. Welcome everybody and thank everybody for joining us tonight. I can't actually see how many is it, how many do we have here, Dave? I can't quite see.
45.
45, excellent, good, perfect. All right, we'll start off with, I'll hand it over to the superintendent. He has a presentation for us tonight, and then we'll have some discussion.
Sure, thanks, Bob. So what we have here, you should be seeing is a screen that says budget status in Budget Workshop 2013. Can everyone see that screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So with that, let's go ahead and go through here. Just an update from our last conversation. When we last spoke, we didn't really have much guidance from the state on what was going to happen with cuts and reductions. We had hoped that, or believed we would be getting information over the weekend, given that it was supposed to be 10 days after the end of the first measurement period, where we were supposed to get some information about what cuts would look like. The governor's office held on to that information pending the action that's currently going on in Washington. As some of you may know, Washington, the House of Representatives did release like a $3 trillion bill yesterday. It does have money in there for New York schools. I think it was like 34 billion, if I remember correctly, over 2 years. I haven't seen the full details on it, but what we have seen kind of in some of the rhetoric out of Washington is that we aren't going to hear about that money until June. So it's not going to be able to help us in this first look back period. It sounds like Friday, the comptroller is going to be releasing information on the overall fiscal status of the state. And after that information, the governor is going to have a detailed kind of outline of what the budget is going to be based on the information they have on the receipts from the first look back period. After that information will be given to the legislature, where they'll have 10 days to offer their own plan up. If they don't wish to offer their own plan up, then the Department of Budget is welcome to move forward with their own plan. So we'll have some more information on what cuts would look like by Friday, hopefully. But we aren't going to hear anything about any federal funds coming into place to help us in time to talk about how they might play out in the budget before we have to have a budget approved so we can get it out to voters for their action on it. Remembering that we have to have an approved budget out to voters by we have to approve a budget by the 21st of May. So that's where we kind of are in information. Just returning back to the returning of the special ed programs that are offsite to return back. Last time we talked about what would happen if we had absorbed some costs in by taking some of those aides who are not special ed connected and then moving them into this program. So what we have here is exactly that. We took 2 of our full-time aides and moved them into the position hypothetically. You can see that by doing that, it does reduce the overall costing to what it would be to Salem. The net savings there is about $8,600 in total. However, it presents a great number of operational challenges if we were to do that this way. For example, right now, the 2 full-time aides that the library is a full-time aide that's not special ed related. So we would have times where the library would be closed for both the elementary students and the high school students during the school year, so kids wouldn't have access to the library. Currently, we have a full-time aide that is helping with ALE and helping with some of the test read pieces for students' modifications for IEP services. So we would have to readjust how we did that. Now, back like 2014, 2015, if I remember correctly, ALE was actually in the library. We would have kids be over in the spot where the makerspace is currently in the high school, but that's when that area always had some type of supervision into it. So if we're not going to have supervision in there all the time, we'll have to find another way to allow ALE to happen. And I believe also during that time that anyone who had, a test read service that was done by the teacher, either while during a push-in type or was done in a resource room at a later time. And we would have to figure out how we would do that, whether we revert to that approach or if the teachers could come up with a different approach to be able to make that happen. This year, there is also some plan to use the ALE testing area as a place for kids to get some credit recovery. We have used an online credit recovery program here the past few years to help students who couldn't afford summer school or didn't go to summer school, that opportunity to make up some of their credit work here at school so they could get the credits that they needed in order to graduate. With that, so that'll impact our program, how we can do some things for some future plans. This will have some other impacts. Schedule. Someone's doing their dishes. If you could find your mute button, please, that'd be great. For example, it's not listed here, but we do use an aide to help with supervision for the girls' locker room. Having 2 male teachers and a girls' locker room, we try to avoid that, so we use an aide to help and that would impede those services as well. Now, is that to say that all of this goes away? Not necessarily. A lot of where our aid services are going to be is dependent on what CSE services are coming up, and those programs are still being reviewed. Though I'm told that we have some expectation of greater service needs at the elementary level. It also depends on what next year's schedule looks like. So if next year, if we work out where we have half the kids at the building at any given time, that would impact the amount of supervision we might need for lunch or what we might need for recess, for example. But those answers we just don't have yet because we're still working on building what those plans would look like. So operationally, to just kind of slide a couple people over that aren't currently have a special education responsibility in their schedule would create some pretty major operational issues for the school for next year, which really brings into question whether that the $8,600 in savings is worth the impact it would have to our overall operation, or we could look and find $8,600 in savings somewhere else. The other piece that I just bring to your attention is that it has been suggested that there may be a need for an additional aid in this program. There's only 2 currently, but there may be a need for a third based on how the programming needs fall out. And if we're hiring on an additional aid, that again puts the cost over what we are currently doing. Any questions on this?
I guess I was just curious if, the thought of adding in the third aides, we'd have 4 adults in there for 3.5 kids. I was just curious what we'd anticipate with doing with more adults than kids in that class.
In some of our self-contained classrooms, that's not necessarily uncommon. So if we're looking at a 12-1-1 type of a setting, you'll have a classroom aide, the teacher's the 1 adult, the classroom aide to assist with the teacher in the class is the second, and then it's your 1-to-1 aides from there. So not every student in that placement would have an aide necessarily. I believe there is there's an aide currently with a 1-to-1, and it was suggested that the possibility of another one would bring that total to 3. Any other questions? Okay, at this point, this part is not included in part of the budget. Remembering that we have 3 look back periods, if there is opportunity for that $8,600 to come at a later date, we are going to have changes to our overall budget as the year goes on. But really right now, as I mentioned before, the impact of the operational changes really don't raise to the benefit of bringing the savings and the opportunity costs don't really raise it to the benefit of changing their operation to that level.
Dr. Glover, I don't have a question about that, but I do have a pushback on that, saying that we don't want to do it because it might create um, operational difficulties, we really are budgeting for the best educational experience for our children, and we shouldn't be looking at the convenience for adults. We really need to take a look at what would be the best possible programming for those kids.
And I appreciate that. And of course, we want to do the best budgeting we can for the best for all of our kids, these kids here, as well as all of those. But the items that I listed don't really have anything to do with benefits of adults. You know, making sure that
You're talking about operational difficulties, and we need to take a look at what, and you're talking about many things that some of the aides do help with, but the two aides that you tapped don't do some of those other things. So I think that we need to make a decision about how we want to move forward, and then later have conversations about how that's going to look, rather than make a decision on what we think it's going to look like.
and I appreciate that too, but and to their supervision of students for their safety isn't an item of adult convenience. Making sure the library is open so we have it available for all our 570 kids is not an adult convenience. That's an educational opportunity for all of our students. That's listed in there. Having timely access to testing right during assessment times along with their peers is not, you know, so.
I'm not saying that it isn't. I'm saying there are other ways to deal with it, and we shouldn't be making budget decisions based on those operational difficulties. We need to look at the best programming and how much it costs. We need to make sure that it's balanced.
And I understand that, but along with the
I'm not
education.
going to argue with you about the operational difficulties. I just want to say that I think that we need to create the best budget that we can with the focus on educational experiences for kids.
Our budget history to date, back in January, our initial budget was almost $14.5 million. Not going to put the details into there. We've gone over that before and it's in past pieces. Once we got the executive budget, we had reduced that initial budget by $110,000. By our last meeting, we had taken out another about $250,000 to the budget before we get to tonight. So just again, a history of we've been working on trimming this budget back since since we realized that things were going to be rough, and even before that. Tonight's meeting shows, you can see there where we're looking at a budget that actually reduces the budget to less than the current year budget, with an overall reduction from our initial conversation of almost $600,000. I used the number of 15% of the foundation aid, which is the number that's listed there, the $835,000. As I had alluded to last time and in our conversations, is about being careful of how we use fund balance. And I had warned that in the initial look, it would be more reduction heavy than reserve use heavy. That is reflected here in how the breakdown works. And this is how that works is shown here in the rest of the slide. In the information, I've provided a listing of reductions for overall. And the overall reductions that I've provided in the information as part of the budget totals over totals over $1.4 million of a reduction. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need to go to a $1.4 million of reduction. I hope we don't have to see a $1.4 million in reduction to get to those spots, but I just include that information so we see it. So there may be lists in different tiers listed out, whereas we want things in different places and different priorities. The priorities that I put into here after working with Karen and the principals and folks on the budget is looking at what are the goals of the board and those priorities there, but also the places where we think we can do some things differently in order to still do our best to maintain a solid educational program to address the needs of COVID-19 as we return back to school into the next year, at the same time as looking at making these reductions in anticipation of a loss of aid. Tier one, and its total is $206,000. Here, if you look down this list, it is based on really it has some impact on the students with the extracurricular pieces. but it really is trying to keep away from impacting anyone's jobs or impacting student program. So we've talked about the reduction in transportation. That's based on a retirement. Then the night shift change is going to impact a person. That person would not end up being reduced. It'd still be kept on as a custodian, but wouldn't end up being supervision for the evening. Those responsibilities would fall back to our current head custodian. Filling the CSE clerical vacancy at 0.5, same with the music vacancy. That will have some impact onto the program for on the music department, but we already have the vacancy, so we can take opportunity of that without impacting another person. We talked last time about that cut of that transfer to the cafeteria. At last point, that's because of the feeding program. We've generated some nice revenue and don't believe we need the $20,000 transfer for next year. The athletic reduction, I have in quotes there, natural. When we come back to the school year, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. In fact, one of the things we need to worry about when we get started is when extracurriculars can start back up. And we know that there's requirements for social distancing, and there's going to be requirements for PPE use for students as well as faculty. But when you look at our athletics program, I don't know of a way that you can socially distance football, for example. We may not be able to start athletics up in the fall at all. We just don't know that answer yet. If this trails into the winter, wrestling is not a sport where you can socially distance, neither is basketball. So there may be some athletics that go on that just don't happen because they can't fit the criteria of being able to keep appropriate distancing. Other considerations that may come into play is looking at a lot of teams around us don't have JV programs. Sometimes we're able to do that. And perhaps we look at, rather than trying to maintain a JV program, that we don't hold the JV program. Of course, there's looking at materials and supplies and equipment which we looked at prior. But we think just naturally, as we come back to a new world next September, that some of these things in athletics will just naturally reduce themselves out, that we don't necessarily need to take affirmative action toward to make happen. So that's where that reduction comes into place. The reductions in the extracurricular activities, there are students in these activities that's there. The student councils are both probably the most active of the groups there. But the Kids Project Coordinator helps with some summer work that we can work and figure out how to help the kids differently. The Tech Support Coordinator is some redundant work that we have our local, plus we have BOCES and school webmaster, as well as with the PR person in place. It ends up being a little bit of redundancy in there that we can take those two and go ahead and fund those for the upcoming school year. I just wanted to make a point on the courthouse readers, that the courthouse readers is a health and safety move more than anything else. At this point, it's the more vulnerable population and kids together. We don't want to keep the density pieces down in order to make sure everyone stays healthy and everyone stays safe. Right when this all started, that was one of the first programs we stopped because of those concerns, and we want to keep that in place until we felt that kind of cessation in place, until we felt more comfortable with the spread of the COVID virus and how it might impact folks. Tier 2 is almost $218,000. This includes a reduction of a cleaner. When you look at there are some guidelines out there that recommend how much footage a person can cover, and when you do the math to it, it indicates that we could get away with having one less cleaner. Now, with that being said, it will impact how we operate there, because we're going to have the disinfecting work we're going to have to do as part of our plan, and the extra cleaning part we have to do. Plus, with the building project going on, it will add some additional stress there, but it still works within the possibility. This is where we have our first consideration of a program reduction in the business department. Here it is elective for some kids, and there's one math class that we can transfer back into the math department. But in the electives pieces, we can look to move those kids to other electives if they need the credit, but it shouldn't have any impact on their educational path. In talking with Ms. Vieira, we believe that we can take the elementary art and eliminate the elementary art position. Regulations actually state that art can take place in the classroom as part of the curriculum. I believe it needs to be under the guidance of of an art teacher, which we can talk with our current art teacher about what some things we should be doing at those levels and work to implement art as part of our overall curriculum at the elementary in classrooms versus it being a separate special. Tier 3 at $231,000, it really starts to getting into program. Here, the first reduction is listed as the high school reading teacher. That's there. It's at the high school level. It is, when we're looking at our AIS program at the high school, there's a couple things to consider. One of those things is without Regents exams, we're going to have some fewer AIS requirements. We were also looking at moving AIS into the departments more. Prior to this, to allow for concentrated work by the reading teacher. The reading teacher to focus on higher needs kids like tier 3 kids. We would just have to find a way to do that differently by likely having one of our other reading teachers move rather than just being elementary, sliding into some more secondary work to cover some of those students as we need to do. And the principals have been looking at some plans and how that might be a possibility. The secondary suggestion here is to look at our AP offerings. Currently, I think we have 8 in total, and that's simply to reduce 1 per department. So we still have AP offerings for upperclassmen, but look at whether we keep all of those AP offerings or not, and then reduce into 2.8 and 0.6 for some of those teachers in those departments to meet those needs. Last year, we added in the health PE position to offer more physical education and more activity to our youngest students as part of an initiative for health and wellness. This recommendation here would be to roll that back to be just back to a health position again. The school counselor here would likely focus at the elementary building. By the regs, we offer more than we currently do, than we're required to. The regs for elementary counseling requires access to a counselor, whereas our kids get this wonderful benefit of having the counselor in the classroom at least once a week, where there's the classroom instruction and conversations and going on. It's a wonderful thing we do here and a great asset to the district. But when we're looking at the size reduction that we have, it's just one of those things we need to consider if we can retain. Extracurricular, adding in the next level of items that you can see listed there. A yearbook is actually an error that's at a later tier. That's a mistake there. We have 2 more tiers. They're listed on another sheet. They aren't part of this consideration. Those are items that we just hope we don't have to get to get us to the bigger numbers. I think it's important here to mention to folks who are online that this has absolutely nothing to do with the work performance or the quality or any aspect of the individuals who do this work. All of these folks do fantastic work. They're true assets of the district, and in regular circumstances, they show that on an everyday basis. In our current situation, they have been, superstars and true assets to the Salem family. Unfortunately, it's the COVID crisis had the financial impact, which puts us in this spot where we are now, where we even have to consider it. Any thoughts or questions on this page?
Dr. Glover, can we go back to the screen before the slide before this? You were talking, I think it was your budget and your revenue. What is, as of tonight, our actual number from the state as far as our foundation aid?
Our foundation aid number is, I thought I had that listed here.
Has that changed any from the April number that we got after the budget was passed from new?
No, we have not received an updated. Aid run from the state at this point.
So at this particular point, those numbers that you're working from are guesstimates?
yeah, we're working off the revenue numbers that we were last given. And then, for the reduction numbers are based off what we're hearing, that the governors say repeatedly is that's a 20% reduction. And most of us, in considering is that's a 20% reduction to foundation aid. We haven't heard any different. Hopefully Friday that brings that up. That's also another reason why I went to 15% rather than 20. And here is because, well, a couple reasons. One, I don't anticipate there will be a flat application of the 20% reduction if that's the true number that comes into place. If it is, we'll have to look at some things differently. And so I went with the lesser number.
So we have this particular look back period for which we have not yet heard anything. And then the next one, I believe it's after June 30th. So to talk about all of these things as if that number was a done deal, we don't have any number different than what they gave us in April, correct?
That's correct.
When do we receive the CARES fund?
We don't know when we get the CARES money yet. There hasn't been any guidance put out, other than we hear there's an application that's going to need to come from it.
Because you've identified a certain dollar amount. So have you been notified that that's the amount that Salem School will get?
In the aid run, from before, that's the number that the state has identified. So in the aid run, it actually indicated that there would be a reduction in our state aid of $123,481. And then it put in a restoration of the same dollar amount if we receive the federal funds. So at this point in the revenue side of things, we're just going to anticipate getting that money at some point.
Okay.
It's wishful thinking, Ann, but it's either have wishful thinking and hope that revenue is going to come in through the federal government versus putting fund balance in its place versus looking at another reduction.
Because that money has actually been released. I mean, it should be coming into the state. That was in the first one of the first bills that they passed, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was part of the first bills they had, but none of that money has been released to schools.
Okay.
While we're on the revenue page, we talked about the CARES money. We talked about the restoration of that $56,000 that we were going to reduce the applied fund balance. We put that back. We left the tax levy at 1.95, and I have my next slide that kind of explains to that. To balance the budget out, we did bring in $17,500 from the debt service reserve to help cover some debt service. So we did bring in just a smidgen extra of applied fund balance in to help balance things out, to bring us to where our budget number is. So here's the possible reduced reduction that's in place. Just to kind of reemphasize Ann's point, we don't have the solid information on this yet, though we were hoping to. This could be, the budget that is here could be something that Friday we're going to look at and say we're right on with what we think is going to happen. It could be we look at it and it's like, nope, we don't have to worry about this at all. Or it could be we're not close and we have to go deeper, we have to do more. And that's kind of alluded to it below. Will the when does the federal stimulus money come into the district? If so, when? How much of a reduction in aid is coming from the state with or without the federal support? And what's next year's schedule looks like, and how will that have an impact on the staffing? We don't know those things yet. But when we compare this version of the budget to what we had last year, it is almost $413,000. Yes, a reduction of almost 3% to the previous year's spending. But at this point, it's based on our best guess.
Dr. Glover?
Yep.
The reduction of nearly 3% of the budget, what is that? You talked about tier 1, tier 2, tier 2, tier 3. What tier, what combination of tiers are you basing that on?
The reduction here out of this is based on these 3 tiers.
So it's all of them?
All of them. There's 2 other, on the other sheet, there are 2 other tiers. There's a tier 4 and a tier 5 on the 2 other sheets that aren't listed in the presentation. that would show the next successive reductions. And generally speaking, it goes to reduction of pretty much the rest of the AP program and electives. And then it goes into a deeper cut talking about pre-K, the rest of athletics and a couple other programming pieces in there. You know, the last two steps really talk about a deep cut into what we do here at the school. It's they're there just so we know we're there. It's a number I hope we don't have to get to it. I'd be honest, I would like to see if we could find a way to get around tier 3. But at this point, we just don't have, we have the information we have and we're stuck in a timeline. So it works to, do we take our best guess where we think reductions are going to come? So we're kind of prepared for those reductions being in place, or, you know, or do we look back at, well, here's what we talked about in a passable budget last week. Do we just go with that? Or do we not do anything until we get that information on Friday? The only challenge with waiting on getting on information from Friday is that information, we get it on the 15th. We have a board meeting on the 19th. The budget has to be approved so we can get it out to voters on the 21st. We're just on an extremely tight deadline. There are some school districts out there who have adopted a budget with the full knowledge that they are going to reduce it. So where their public budget, it doesn't include necessarily all the cuts, but they've reached out to, you know, the teachers to let them know that a reduction is likely coming. We could certainly take that approach. We really would like to have the next round of information to try to take that first look back period into consideration. Before we did that, unfortunately, we're not going to get that information until the end of the week. So we moved forward with, if we had to go with a large reduction of a budget, this is what one could look like.
What is the bottom line of this budget?
Bottom line of this budget is a budget of $13,484,993. That's a reduction in the overall expenditure of $412,838 over the previous year's budget, and a reduction in overall spending of almost 3%.
You said the change in the program component. I'm not knowing how this, I can't see both slides to know the tiers, how the tiers break down into the items that you have, the components. Like, you have $700,000 on that page, right? That's cumulative, or are you, or is it just 231 total?
This page is the $655,000.
Okay.
On that page.
All right.
And that is mainly in the program budget. Did you look through most of this work is here? It's all in the program budget.
Okay, then would you, there you go. But you have the component change in the program component at $271,000.
Right. Because not all those reductions necessarily come out of the program budget. Some of them come out of
But I was trying to make the point to understand how that breaks down into the different components. Okay. You have to be hitting the program, you know, I can't see what you're taking out of that program component between those, because the slides don't. Let's see. Because the big ticket items are your teaching. So you're saying that the elementary art teacher, the business teacher, high school reading teacher, changing the AP, the health, the school counselor, that only affects the budget with $271,000?
Yes.
Well, then we're getting a big bang for our buck. Would like to see how that all breaks down.
Yep, I've written a note of how do the tiers break into components, and we can put that together. That's just adding another column in. The tax levy, we're still recommending staying at 195. The reason why, a couple of reasons we're recommending is when we look at kind of the economic concerns of the unemployment in the area and across the state, just the community concern of maintaining a budget that is still, responsible to our community for what their bills are going to be for their, for their homes and for their tax bills. There is a possible loss of STAR as part of this cut coming up, which will increase those tax bills. And along with our newly enacted senior exemption, before any of this happened, that's going to also raise some tax bills for folks who don't meet that exemption piece. If the board chose to go higher, I included the rates here on the levy, if it wanted to look at a higher rate. The other pieces are 195. Remember, our levy limit goes up to 5%, when those numbers are listed there. Just two other quick items on general, and that's the basics on the budget piece. And I guess I'll ask the board a couple of questions, and then we can go from there. Propositions are the same. There's going to be 4 items: the board seats, the bus leases, and the library, because the library asked us to be on there. All of our ballots are going to be absentee ballots only. They're all going to get mailed out. They're all due back to us by 5 o'clock on June 9th, where we will publicly open them. And then once we're able to tally all the votes, be able to determine what the status of the budget is for the library and then for the board seats and on the buses. There has been a couple different approaches taken to consider on how we want to get ballots out. We are a poll registration district, meaning that people register when they come in to vote. You come into the polls, you sign in the book, that's your registration that you voted, then you go in and do your voting. There has been allowance to take the poll registrations for the past 4 years, glean all the different individuals who voted on there, and just simply send ballots to those folks with some announcement out to the community at large that if you didn't get a ballot, to please request one, and so we can send you one. There are some school districts who are taking that approach as a cost savings measure. The other approach is to take, which is what we're currently doing, is to take our poll records and compare those to the registered voters in the school district, sending out absentee ballots to all of those folks who are eligible to vote to there. We anticipate still missing some people in that mix, and then having them return their ballots back for those who wish to vote. It is an expensive venture. I don't have an estimate on that, but it's thousands of dollars to do that. We started with this approach simply because we didn't want to disenfranchise everyone. All those folks who live in the district who are eligible to vote have a right to do so. And with the way that the state's told us how we have to do this election, I think it is a safer position for the district to be in, to send out absentee ballots to everyone who may be eligible to vote, rather than just basing it off the poll vote approach. When you look at our last 4 years, we had a couple years where we were over 300 voters who came in. In the years in between, it was in the hundreds. So I'm not sure if sending out somewhere between 300 and 400, ballots to people is adequate enough to cover everyone who might have that potential or wish to vote. The board can certainly say they know because it's cost savings, we can do the poll registration vote to do that. But we're moving forward with all the registered voters. So we hope to get everyone and not have anyone disenfranchised. And budget hearing, we'll have to set this meeting up.
Sorry, Dave, just before we move away from the vote piece. So how many, ballpark, how many ballots do we think we're sending out?
A couple thousand.
Okay. And we don't really know. We say thousands of dollars. We don't know exactly what that's.
Some other districts have put out some estimate. We don't have a full estimate on it yet. We're working through BOCES. Where it could be around $10,000 could be the possibility. If it's $4 per package, and we're sending out 2,000 packages, that'd be less than that. If we send out more than that, it's more, but probably the $10,000 range.
And so that $4 per package is materials timed, mostly timed to do it. Postage, a small part of that.
Postage, we have to mail it out. We have to have return postage to it. It's exactly the same as an absentee ballot. So it's the ballot, it's the oath envelope, it's the return envelope, it's the envelope that we need to mail out to get the envelopes to everybody. So they're not just the same envelopes, like legal envelopes or, standard mail envelopes. So it's, it's a little more expensive than just doing regular mail.
So $4 each. That's higher than I would guess. So but
That's
that's a ballpark.
That's a ballpark number, Bob. I'll mark down here to see what we know what that price tag is. We're still putting the list together. I mean, it's Sue Neal and Gina Eastman have been doing the yeoman's work on this to do the comparison between, the voter registration and then the poll registration, and then the comparisons to the tax rolls to make sure that our folks who live in Hebron, we're only getting our folks from Hebron and not folks who are Granville students. Their Salem is easy because they're all Salem. Shushan, we have to watch out for some Cambridge, and same with kind of Jackson and that way. Greenwich is totally simple because there's not a lot of people in Greenwich.
Not Salem town, not the town of Salem, but the zip code of Salem.
Zip code of Salem, yeah.
Okay. Well, no, just philosophically, I mean, I think that giving people the opportunity to vote makes a lot of sense. I was just curious what that expense would be. And it'll be really interesting to see if that's the route we go. It'll be interesting to see what kind of participation we get.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of concern about these budget votes getting challenged with 310 challenge to the commissioner, and a large part of defending against that challenge is what did we do to make sure that everyone who had the opportunity to vote voted. And from my seat, the safest way to do that is try to get a ballot to everyone who's eligible to vote. So with that, that's the basics of the presentation. I think board, what we need to do is figure out what we want to have ready for the 19th. On the 19th, do we want to say, we aren't really prepared to talk about what the cuts are going to be because we really want to take a look at, what the state numbers look like and see what those reductions really are, and then be able to take a look what those reductions are and then compare them to, the tiered list here we have here, and then talk about if that tiered list fits the way we want it to fit. And then do the comparison and then work forward with the cuts there. So go back to a budget that assumes no cuts to it, which would be that May 5th, and go ahead and approve that and then explain to the public that we're going with this budget as if there weren't any reductions coming, but if reductions do come, this is what it will look like. Or we can move forward with, this budget and hold on to it and see what Friday brings and make adjustments for the 19th meeting, and then decide if we need to have an emergency meeting on the 21st to approve a final vote. Or the challenge in all of this isn't anyone's fault who's here. And that is that the timeline that we've been given to do this is terribly short. Our normal budget process in a regular year, we start talking about enrollment numbers and basics and schedules in November and December, and spend January through March and sometimes into April really putting a budget together around the program. And when money, when we don't have these type of challenges. We have these types of challenges and we still don't know exactly what those challenges are. And we're looking at only having 8 days until we have to have a decision made. So we're doing the best I've described it as doing the best we can while we're in free fall, because we're not building a plane here because there's nothing solid to hold on to. And until we get that information from the state, we don't know exactly what the cuts will look like.
And can I just chime in? I'm gonna mess with your dates a little more in that our printer needs final ballot to print by May 20th, not the 21st, even though the governor's given us till the 21st to finalize. So there's another deadline in the mix.
No, thanks, Karen, for clarifying that.
You know, I am comfortable with either approach. I think there's some value in saying, let's look at that May 5th. There, bring it to the voters, explain to the voters what this is. And if, if all the money that is threatened to be cut is going to be restored, this is what our budget would look like. And then address the cuts as they come along the way, because unfortunately, we're going to do this a couple times. It's not going to be, we're done with it now. And then, when June shows up, we don't have to worry about it. And when December shows up, we don't have to worry about it again. We may be going through this process those 3 times. I'm also okay with, Dave, let's hold on to this. And it's, if we get that information over the weekend and it's what we have listed here tonight is too aggressive, we can always back off it. If it's not aggressive enough, we can always say, we're going to stop here and this is what we'll go to the voters and we'll make adjustments as time goes along. Or we can say, we need to make adjustments and this is how we'd like the adjustments to be made. The challenge there is it sounds like on the 19th, we have to have a budget.
Well, thanks for going through all that. That presentation was actually a little bit different than the one I had gotten yesterday, and so there was actually some new information in that was very helpful to see.
Yeah, and Bob, it's because we got new information today.
And the other piece, I guess, is I don't have lots of hopes that Friday will shed a lot of light on this. I know I talked to the financial aid folks at NISPA last week, and they actually didn't expect anything to come out between last Wednesday and today. And they, at that point, they were saying that the governor's office was saying they were waiting to hear what came from the federal government. So, I think that, I wouldn't anticipate anything major coming from New York State. They might point us in a direction, but they're not really going to know until we find out more about whether federal government is going to help out some of these states. So I think we're going to have to we're probably going to know about as much now as we're going to know by next Tuesday.
And unfortunately, it's, I'm at one point I'm with you. I had high hopes, like last week, I had high hopes that we'd have this information now to be able to move on something, but we'll see if the governor's office does give out that detailed budget, and if it does have specific runs, so we have something to work with. But even so, this is a lot. It's a lot to consider. There's a lot to look at, and a lot of unknowns still, even if we're given numbers to look through. And as we like to talk over things anyway, on things that are much simpler, and this is very complex. So it's worth some extra conversations on what these reductions may look like, which is why I go back to, at one level, I'm comfortable saying that May 5th budget is where that is, and just being upfront and honest with everybody and saying we're here. If no reductions happen, as we get information that's more solid, we will move forward with those reductions. It's just at this point we don't feel comfortable because we don't have rock solid information.
Dr. Glover, if we were to do that and to go with the previous budget, that would not change the tax levy, would it? It wouldn't change how much we could raise in taxes?
Once we set the budget, it would impact the levy. That is that's the downfall of, if we go back to that, is that whatever we set for revenue is what we're going to set for revenue. It's only the expenditure side at that point we have playroom in.
Right. So that if we were to adopt a budget, people would know what the percentage would be?
Yes. So if we were,
that would not change.
That would not change. Remember, whenever we put out for a tax levy limit, that is the highest amount that we can request from the community. We can go lower, we can't go higher.
I'm just asking because if there might be people who think, well, they're cutting the budget, therefore it's cut my taxes. So I don't believe that to be the case. So I just think we need to be clear that whatever budget we present, we just will have to work within the amount of money that's raised in revenue. It won't change people's tax bills, correct?
Correct. That is
No,
correct.
that's a good clarification.
So
We need to
they're,
react, right? As we get more information, then we would have to react on what we provide that side. But right, because the state revenue would change, but that local revenue is not going to change one way or the other.
right. So one way or the other, that, there might be changes, but it wouldn't change what people are, being billed.
And that was one of the other pieces in my conversation with Brian Fessler. And this was just that, I just was curious what other districts are doing. He said, you can either go in like you're going to with the budget and then make your cuts later, or if you have a lower budget, he said what's happened in the past is that there's educational grants that come from the state, so that then you can spend that money without going back to the voters to ask them to spend the money. And so that would, so either way, you can aim one place but at the end of the day, we'll just need to wait to figure out what information, as we have more information, to know what kind of money we're getting from the state.
Well, I feel that you make the best decision you have with the information that you have at the time. And right now, the information that we have in the time, I understand is not going to be accurate, but it is what it is. And we have the number of the state aid that has been provided in the April budget. We talked about the governor, but would hopeful that the legislature would also step in and not let those kind of draconian cuts take place. But I think that we should take the wait and see attitude. You definitely have created something that has some efficiencies, and there are some changes in there. So I think it's a mindful budget based on some of the things that we're going to be facing. But to start cutting now when we don't know what those numbers are going to be, I don't know how, it's not productive in not the message I think I want to send.
And I 100% respect that thought, because school budgets are always a little bit of a guessing game, right? It's never an exact science what we're going to get into there, but it's not with this level of variance.
Right.
The level of variance that we have coming up for what we are getting or what we may not get is so unclear that it's near on impossible to make it a sound, wise judgment on it. And when we're looking at all of the things that we're going to have to worry about for next year and impacts there, it's almost impossible. It's not impossible. We can do it. But the challenge to do it without something firm to stand on makes it very, very, very difficult.
And you're talking about some very significant cuts to programs. Mm-hmm. And I do think that is there should be no rush to judgment in what stays and what goes. I was taking a look at what you had done in the summary program component, and overall, that probably is the correct percentage of change, but that also includes things that are not teaching. Program includes transportation, the retirees. I mean, there's 2, 4, 6 things that are in that column. So there's many variables, and the total teaching does take a hit closer to $300,000. So that makes a lot more sense to me as far as those numbers are concerned. So I do think that this is something that if we are going to be making changes that maybe cannot be undone, that we do them with the most information that we have. And I don't think this rush to judgment is the best way to do it.
No, I agree. And I think that it's important. It's great that we are doing this in a transparent manner so people can see what, right. So the community can see some potential cuts that may have to happen. I mean, we don't know at this point. But I think that, making those cuts now, I think it makes some sense to wait till we have some more information before we do that.
Especially since really, if we just let people know that what we're doing is creating something and setting a tax levy that will affect them, and then we will continue to work with that money to make sure that we spend it the best possible way. But that might include cutting programs as we go through the year, cutting services. But I don't think we should make a decision now based on a number that we don't have and we aren't even close to getting.
Other thoughts from other board members?
I agree with that.
I agree as well.
Yeah, my thought was, at least with the real numbers, you know, the tiers don't have to be taken in whole either.
That's right, Mary. And that's, in the example here, they are taken in whole to again, to get to that 15% number. Even where the tiers are listed, that's, you know, that's not chiseled in rock. You know, they can look at, and it's, you know, I'll bring up the pre-K, for example. In there, the pre-K program is separate from the pre-K transportation. You know, often we have said in our conversations that the transportation is vital and important to the pre-K program. You might want to consider those together. I have it separated for a couple different reasons. But if it was like, you know, if we're going to have pre-K, we're going to have the transportation put it together. Let's put those together and they will belong here, you know, in tier 4 or tier 5 or wherever we put those. Or if it's like something of the case of, you know, we have a couple positions here that are listed in tier 2 or tier 3 that we don't want to look at full-time position reductions until we look at other things first to go with a part-time reduction. So these full-time reductions should really move to like a tier 4, if that makes sense. So there's latitude in where we can move some things around. It creates other sets of challenges. I'm sorry, Heidi, go ahead.
I just think we need to also think about like how kids are going to be coming back from this. I think, you know, we're looking at deep cuts in counseling services, and this could be the time when we need the most counseling services. These kids are coming back from something that's never happened before. It's going to be a significant back. I think mental health is going to be a big concern, and we're taking deep cuts there. So I think waiting and seeing where we can cut and what we can pull from to least impact children would be the best option at this point.
I also have a question on the possibility. So I know the Cal State system just announced that they will be learning remotely in the fall. What does a scenario like that mean for if that were to happen for us? Has that been thought through, and what does that mean budget-wise, particularly on the expenditure side?
We are beginning thoughts of what that looks like. I've had conversations with Jane about, you know, we need to get together and have some conversations about what that might look like, because you know, what does remote learning look like next year? It won't look like it looks like this year. This year was, you have 3 days, make it happen. Now it's, if this is going to be part of the mainstay of what we do, no, it needs to look differently. And that will impact what our day looks like. That'll impact what our class sizes look like. So there's a whole series of conversations we're just starting in. The governor has given us some loose guidelines of where to head. We don't have any guidance from the state ed department on what those might look like yet to there, other than, you know, the kind of the rally of start thinking about it. And that's where we are. We're in those conversations of what does next year look like and how do we do this differently? But right now, to be honest, the priority is how do we wrap up the school year with the 4th marking period? How do we address those kids who might need summer school if it's allowable? What's graduation going to be? And what's graduation going to look like? And how do those diplomas going to work out? You know, at the elementary level, it's about, you know, class lists and getting things picked up. And so there's a lot of this end of year pieces that we're working on to get wrapped up. At the same time, we're thinking about, okay, so what does next year look like? It's a very busy time here without any students in the building.
Well, it seems like it's completely out of our control, but you know that the pensions in some of these states is what's holding up the federal program. But there's been so many programs, the payroll protection program for businesses, that there would seem like there would be something that would cover at least parts of that, because obviously that's a big part of our expense, and looking just to make sure that you know, obviously we want to not impact people. But then also looking, you know, if this is prolonged and goes into the fall, what that looks like for payroll, and just the obviously the learning piece, but then also all the our other employees who are not involved in instruction.
Dr. Glover, I did have one question about, I don't know if this is a question for you or for Karen McGregor, the pupil services line. What kinds of things do you find in there?
Go ahead, Karen.
Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute. So pupil services is your guidance. It's your both our counselors. It's our co-curricular. It's our nurse. It's our social worker, our psychologist, athletics. And
That's where the athletics is. Okay.
That's where your athletics are. And I think I just named everything.
Okay. Because there was a significant increase in there and I didn't know, what that was accounting for that.
A significant increase?
Didn't it show 31,000?
I show pupil services down 60,000.
60. Well, I think what's happened is some of the information that was shared with the board yesterday has been, it was different. So in looking at that, okay. So I will double check that. Okay, thank you.
You bet. We can get you updated ones. We've been working on this every day.
Thank you. We need to make a decision about whether we have that special ed classroom in Cambridge. Move forward to solidify something for a budget.
It can be done outside of the budget process because of the level of significance of there. The bigger challenge to it is all the items that I had mentioned before.
So that means you wouldn't include it?
No, it's, I wouldn't include it as part of the overall budget. The savings in relation to the bigger piece is an $8,600. We can find $8,600 in savings in another line if we wanted to save $8,600 out of the budget piece. But in that overall bigger part of the program, I think we can make that decision outside of what the budget process is and treat it as if we did treat any other cut that or change that we might have to make after a budget is passed. We have some timing things we would have to do with Cambridge and some conversations there. So there's some timeliness to it, but I don't think it's a decision that needs to be made tonight.
Okay, just from a fiscal position, that is money that's going to be raised, for Salem School. And I would like to see it to preserve the programs here and preserve teachers and staff here. Because we're looking at changes in staff numbers.
So we had a really nice turnout tonight. I think if there's people who from the public who would like to make a statement, ask a question, we would welcome. I think there's what are we up to about 75 people on now. So
wow.
So if instead of going through, we like to typically in our meetings I go through one by one and call on people to make them at least acknowledge us. And most people have a comment. We won't do that tonight, but if people would like to, so anybody obviously who has a camera and we can see, you can just wave to us and we'll unmute you and let you know, give you a minute. Otherwise, we've got a bunch of people who've just called in, and anybody who would like to unmute and make a comment, ask a question. And we'll give you a little bit of time here to collect your thoughts. If nobody jumps right in. Yeah, so we have Marcy Armstrong. We're gonna, yep, go ahead, Marcy.
I just want to back up what Heidi said about how important the social emotional issues are going to be when we come back.
No, I think that's a great point. That's something that you know the board has committed to through our goals, and I think that goes for the district. So thank you for that input. I can't believe there's nobody else who has thoughts or questions. Like I said, yeah, go ahead. Who's this?
It's Stacy Rich.
Hi, Stace, go ahead.
So I guess I am interested a little bit more from the quote unquote the natural reduction of sports, and I was just curious with the natural reduction of the spring sport if there is a number out there, you know, between coaches, you know, not receiving their full salary and transportation costs and officials' fees. I'm just kind of curious, is that a number that can be shared with us with how much this COVID has already saved the district, and how does that, which is it was budgeted for, how does that, is that rolled into next year? You know, just a question about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Stace, go ahead, Dave.
To that is for the savings pieces of it, we can find that number. To there, it's not something we have kind of like hanging on our hip. And the way any of those savings from this year get rolled over would be rolled over either through applied fund balance or through unappropriated.
You said, I'm sorry, car drove by. You said fund balance or what else, Dr. Glover?
It's either you know, those funds would get rolled either through an applied fund balance or an unappropriated fund balance. So there are times where we may have an expense that we know is coming up right at the end of the year, and we'll encumber funds to carry over. But that's not a general practice that you use for large scale expenditures. To there. And sometimes when we see we have savings at the end of the year, we'll look at what can we buy for next year's budget out of this year's budget as a cost savings measure by spending this year's money for next year's products. So there's ways we kind of work to put some of those savings in. But other than through that, you know, that fund balance piece, there isn't a way to say, we're going to take this group of money and just tuck it over here, other than through those means to save it for next year.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Frank Fraunhofer. I see you have a comment or question.
I looked at it. It seems to me that if I just want to acknowledge, I guess, that if the tax levy went up 2%, it seems to be that's about a teaching position. So if you find out on Friday that you have less state aid than you thought you were going to, I looked at the chart at the end. I just want to see if I am right in my calculation. That if it went up to 4%, it would be about one full-time teaching position.
So just so to clarify, so you're saying if it went from the 195 up to 4? Dr. Glover, I'm just going back to look at that number. Go ahead.
I was just noticing here that Jerry Sullivan had asked how many kids we have.
Just want to know, can we let's just answer Frank's question quick, and then we'll.
Oh, for that number?
Back to.
Yeah, sorry. So Frank, you're really close. Not that I want to argue with a Harvard man. That about 1% of the tax levy is $51,000. You know, so when we look at our, you know, when hiring a new person, and we generally look at $80,000 as a new hire. So that, you know, you do the math into there, it works out to be about 1.5-ish, you know, 1 1/3 in there. But that the equation of the tax levy to a person's position will vary depending where the number is. But generally 1% would generate $51,000 on our levy currently.
Perfect. Thanks for that question, Frank. So there is through the chat, the question from Jerry Sullivan on how many children have pre-registered for pre-K as of now.
Karen, do you know that number off the top of your head? Oh, how about Karen Vieira?
Oh, sorry.
Amy actually voiced up on the chat. She said that it's about 25 kids right now are registered for pre-K.
Perfect. We never did get to Mary Kay's question from before about if she was muted. She was muted. So, are there other questions from anybody else in the public audience? And if anybody can just unmute themselves if they're not on screen, they can just unmute themselves and speak at any point now.
Hello.
Hello.
Did you just hear me?
Jane, that's got to be Jane.
Yeah.
How are you? You're on now.
Yeah. How are you doing? Good. I have one question and then just something to say. I missed the last thing that Ann said about the kids coming back, or the special ed being brought back. Can you just repeat what you had said? Because my computer froze at that time.
Hi, Jane, it's Ann. I just was wondering if we had to make that decision prior to finalizing the budget. And Dr. Glover said no, that within the budget itself, we could make those determinations about how to move forward when you had the information about the students and their needs.
Yeah, well, I have to say that I was just really pleased to hear that, it's hard, this whole thing, the COVID and the whole budget. I'm trying to figure everything out, and it's difficult to have an opportunity for any informed decisions when we don't have all the data. So we appreciate that we're holding out a little bit on it. The one thing that I think COVID has done for all of us unexpectedly, it has brought the community together in a different way, in a really positive way. Whether it's the connections that we've made with each other, the bonds, everything we've done, whether it's the aides in the lunchroom and the bus drivers and everything coming together, and the kids actually really wanting to come back too. So there's been that establishment. If we can keep the community intact as much as together, I think that's really powerful because, well, for so many reasons, but we have built something pretty special in the past couple of months. So I'm glad to see that we're going to hold off to at least to make a decision when we have to for the numbers. So that's all I have to say.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that input. Any other questions?
Can you see me? It's Julie Northshield.
I hear you. I don't see you, but I hear you.
Okay, so I have I'm kind of echoing what everybody is saying. I feel like I'm kind of trying to build a house in a hurricane, not knowing what budgets are and stuff, but I feel like I need to at least express that, I serve the most vulnerable in our community, and I just want to make sure that we meet their needs. And when we look at programming, to cut out a pre-K for students in preparation, to look at reading, which is a lifetime learning skill, hurts my heart to think that those are the areas that we're going to look at. I'm glad we're holding off on making those decisions. I think it's really important to have a stable foundation before we start to move forward. When we return, we're going to have construction going on. We're going to have students not going to their regular rooms again. We're going to have kind of a melee of things happening, and I worry for our students overall. So I'm glad that I was here tonight. I'm glad that we're holding off and making any kind of cuts. I think student needs should be number one. I think looking at what students need individually in programming, like Ann says, is imperative. And I think we need to look at what programs are best for students. As far as the life skills program, I think a life skills program in Salem would be great, but I think trying to put together a program that rivals Cambridge in what they offer now for those students that we have there would be really difficult in 3 months or in, whatever. I think it would be hard to rival that program. I think we need to be sensitive and community oriented and make connections before kind of diving in. I don't want to present a program that's done without thoughtfulness and care for each one of the students. Anyways, that's kind of all I have to say. I just want to protect my students is the bottom line, kind of that mama bear kind of deal. And I just want to make sure that we don't cut programs that benefit them, not just a grade level, but a lifetime. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. And we're glad that you're here too. Anybody else? I have a question, then we'll see if anybody else thinks of a question in the meantime. But just as far as with the building project, I mean, it's a little bit ironic here that we, right, just in this environment, that it's great that we're able to continue the building project. Does that present any opportunities for us to be able to, is there anything that would allow us to continue because it was continued through the building project? Does that make sense?
Not fully. What do you mean by could be continued?
Well, I know we talked about the communications person at one point, right? That, you know, during a building project, there's things that can get wrapped into a building project, things we're already doing. Are there any have those opportunities been looked at, or do none of those opportunities exist other than potentially that one?
The PR person into the building project piece, we haven't fully gotten into because we're just really getting underway for the project. I am not sure. I don't think there is anything else we could roll into the project. Short of, you know, you might be able to make the argument of like an additional clerk, or when we talked about that clerical support, you might be able to make an argument there because of the extra workload for the project that you hire someone in to help with that part of the project.
I wasn't thinking an extra. I was thinking a current, or you know, if there's additional cleaning that has to happen, and we can do that with current staff and have that be, because I think there is going to be additional cleaning, you know, there's going to be an increased burden because of the project, and so, you know, we think of it as an additional person, but it's actually somebody that then we don't have to lay off from a current position.
I am not, you know, using building project funds to supplant a current expense, you know, so moving it from the general fund to the building project. That's probably an auditor question that we'll look into.
Right. I mean, obviously 100% has to be above board, but it could, you know, I think that it wouldn't be surprising that some of our folks would have increased demands because of the building project. And so it seems like they're, you know, that, I mean, obviously I think talking to an auditor would make a lot of sense, just to see if there were any opportunities to, because that would be an expense we were going to have anyway, and just, you know, where we put that if possible.
Right. We'll put an email to an auditor and see what we can find.
All right. Well, I think we have a consensus from the board on the direction that we're going to go from now until we have more information. I'll just ask one last time if there's any other public comment that or input people would like to have. Now is your chance. All right. Any other questions from the board, or any other comments from the superintendent?
Yeah, I just for one point, for our 19th meeting, we're going to put together the propositions for the budget and the rest of the ballot that's going back to that May 5th budget. Hey, I'm sorry, the April, that last budget we just presented last week, the April budget, for your approval.
Yes, and I was just going to pull that back up.
I'm just going to make sure, I just want to make sure I'm clear into that. So, you know, because we're building the agenda for the budget now. So when we put those in, when you see that pieces, you know, it'll have the tax levy, it'll have the dollar amount, it'll have those pieces, but it's going to be that prior budget we talked about at the last meeting that we put together in April. That's the budget piece that we're going to use. And then we will use that as our foundation for how the rest of everything works once we get more information from the state.
Yeah, I think that was my understanding of what we had said. Is that other board members? Is that was that your understanding of? I want to make sure we're all on the same page with this as well.
Yes.
Yes.
I see your head, Bob. Jen.
Yeah.
Radio's on and you're just grooving out.
Yeah.
And you as well, Mary. Yep. Excellent.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
So will you resend that? I just feel like I have multiple copies.
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
resend it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate everybody taking time out of their night to come and listen in and kind of see us struggle through this. I think it's important, this transparency and just this process. And you know, I think on the one hand we're kicking the can down the road, but hopefully down the road we have a lot more information, and then it can go from there. So it is 7:25, so we will adjourn this meeting at 7:25. Thank you very much.
Bob,
Thank you,
remember to give me
everybody.
those back, please.
Oh, I didn't realize you gave it to me. Yep. I'll, got a few screens going here, so I got to find my pointer.
Okay.
There you go. Your host. Thank you very much.